Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Ask a Property Manager. This is episode number 48. Today is November 25th, 2020. I'm Andrew Schultz coming to you from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo, principal broker of Own Buffalo Inc. On today's show, we're going to be talking about renting without leases. We're also going to be talking about using an ozone generator safely, and we're going to take a look at home prices around the country as well as a whole bunch more. Before we jump into that, we're going to take a quick look at our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager can be found here at Facebook every Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. You can also find the replay the same day over at Facebook as well as on our YouTube page, youtube.com/OwnBuffalo. As always, you can check out our Instagram over at instagram.com/OwnBuffalo. We do post things there that we wouldn't post on Facebook or on YouTube, just a little bit different style of content, obviously. Last but not least, don't forget that you can grab a free 30-minute consultation with me over at ownbuffalo.com as well. We have a few slots available for next week. Obviously, there's nothing booked out for the end of this week, but we do have a couple of time slots open for next week. And don't forget that the free 30-minute phone consultations go away at the end of this year. So once 2020 finally comes to an end, if 2020 ever finally comes to an end, so too do the free consults. So make sure to take advantage of that while you can. Don't forget about the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. New episodes of the podcast come out every Thursday morning. You can find that over at rentprep.com/podcast or anywhere podcasts are heard. This week's episode is a little bit different. We're taking a look at different real estate issues that had passed during the general election on a state-by-state basis. So if you are outside of New York State, I know that there were several states that we talked about. That might be a good episode for you. There wasn't a lot of change here in New York during the general election, but there were some pretty big impacts in other states. So you might want to listen to that episode just for that. We're also going to be talking about how to work with tenants to inspect occupied apartments and what kind of a procedure you should go through if you plan on giving a tenant early access to a home. So don't miss out on that. New episodes of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast come out every Thursday over at rentprep.com/podcast or anywhere podcasts are heard. Let's jump into our first news article of the day here. Whoops, scroll up a little bit. This one comes to us via Housing Wire. Home prices see the greatest gain in over 6 years, according to the S&P CoreLogic Case-Shiller Home Price Index. This was published yesterday on November 24th in the afternoon. The S&P CoreLogic Case-Shiller Index, that is a tongue twister, covering home prices from all 9 U.S. Census divisions rose 7% in September from a year ago, the greatest year-over-year gain since 2014 and nearly 23% higher than its peak in 2006. The September increase was also greater than the 4.8% uptick reported in August and represented the largest annual gain since May 2014 as record low mortgage rates and a lack of inventory continued to push upward pressure on home prices. Home prices are normally sticky, meaning that they will often take a while to respond to market shifts, said Matthew Speakman, economist at Zillow. These elevated levels of market competition have been placing upward pressure on prices for months, but home prices have just recently begun to take off in earnest. Some measures show home prices now growing at a faster pace than they ever have. Homes went under contract 2 weeks faster in September than they did a year earlier, but construction is playing catch-up to feed the frenzy. Single-family housing starts, driven heavily by low interest rates and changing consumer patterns, rose to an annual rate of 1.53 million in October, the highest since this February, and far past the 1.108 million recorded in September, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. What they mean by single-family housing starts is the beginning of construction on a new build home. The price jumps reported in the Case-Shiller Index roughly matched up with stats from the Federal Housing Finance Administration, which reported that prices increased 3.1% over the second quarter, the biggest gains since at least 1991, when the agency began keeping records. So that's pretty significant there as well. Looking through a more localized lens, the Phoenix experienced the steepest year-over-year gain, rising 11.4%. The 16th consecutive month, Phoenix home prices rose more than those of any other city. Seattle took the second greatest increase once again, up 10.1%, with San Diego following at 9.5%. Those are monstrous gains when you're talking about a year-over-year gain. When you're talking about a change in the value of your home from $100,000 to $111,400 in the course of a year, that's a substantial jump in the value of your property. And that's exactly what would be what you would be experiencing in Phoenix if you owned a home worth $100,000 last year to this year. That's a pretty big jump. Housing prices were consistently robust nationally, even in the worst performing cities. New York at 4.3%, Chicago at 4.7%, according to Craig Lazara, marketing director and global head of investment strategy at the S&P Dow Jones Indexes. Our first 3 monthly readings since June of this year have all shown accelerating growth in home prices, and September's results are quite strong. This month's increase may reflect a catch-up of COVID-depressed demand from earlier this year. Might also presage future strength as COVID encourages potential buyers to move from urban environments to suburban homes. The next several months' report should help shed light on this question. That's basically what we've been talking about for the last several months at this point on the show, with the mortgage rates dropping, the home prices increasing, inventory shrinking. In Buffalo, we're down, I think the last stat I saw was like a 15% drop year over year in terms of the number of homes that we have in inventory right now, which is pretty substantial. Though home prices continued to rise in September, home buyers showed little interest in slowing down, driving existing home sales up for the 5th consecutive month in October, 4.3% year over year. More of the same as what we were just talking about. So this article gives you a pretty good idea that it seems as though the housing prices are going to continue to increase for the next little while. Obviously, every market is different. Your market may not have the same growth that Phoenix has or that Seattle has, but hopefully you are experiencing some growth. I know that here in the Western New York market, we have been seeing quite a bit of growth as well, which has been great for everybody who already owns property here in the Western New York region, but it can be a little bit troublesome if you're on the buyer side. When you combine the low inventory and a higher than normal purchase price, it creates some headaches for home buyers. So that's where we're at in terms of home pricing here in Western New York. Next article, this one comes to us from Buffalo Business First. This one's probably more relevant if you live in the Buffalo region, but it's worth noting even if you're outside of the Buffalo market, kind of what's happening in terms of affordable housing. BMHA, which is the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority, rehab attracts a lot of out-of-town attraction. 3 BMHA complexes will change their looks in the upcoming years. Renovations are scheduled for the Commodore Perry Apartments on Perry Street in the Buffalo's East Side, Marine Drive Apartments near Canal Side, and the Schaefer Village Complex on Ontario Street in the Riverside neighborhood. Renovations and upgrades, which are estimated at $250 million, won't start until 2022, following a year of community meetings and input sessions. The redevelopment of the Perry, Schaefer, and Marine Drive developments represents an extraordinary opportunity to reshape the face of public housing in the city of Buffalo, said Gillian Brown, BMHA Executive Director. Gillian Brown, I think that is. I apologize. The development teams were selected after a request for qualification process that began in February and attracted proposals from 17 groups, many from out of town. We've got some of the best in the country, said Brendan McKeffey, Buffalo Office of Strategic Planning Executive Director. It's exciting to see the level of interest and their vision for the buildings. We've got some of the, the 3 complexes built in the late 1950s and early 1960s have a combined 1,500 apartments that represent 30% of BMHA's housing portfolio. That's actually worth noting. BMHA is the largest, I believe the largest provider of affordable housing in Western New York currently. I would think that it would probably be BMHA and then Belmont Housing and Rental Assistance would be the top providers of affordable housing here in Western New York, followed by some of the other nonprofit organizations in the area. And the article goes on and talks a little bit about what the rehab projects are going to look like and things like that. But these are apartment complexes that have largely not had a lot of renovation or rehab work done on them in a long time. To call them depressed would be an understatement. To call them depressing would be an understatement. So it's interesting that there's money finally coming back into the affordable housing arena. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this as time goes on, especially as we uncover more and more of the impacts of COVID-19 across, varying sectors of society, varying sectors of industry. I think that we're going to see a lot more money freed up for affordable housing over the course of the next few years. If you're looking for a niche and you aren't afraid to do affordable housing, because it definitely is a different beast than traditional rental, It's definitely different than short term or luxury or even normal long term. Affordable housing is its own niche for sure. I think that there's definitely a lot of value to be had in the affordable housing arena right now, if that is the type of portfolio that you want to run. So something to kind of keep in mind if you're trying to figure out what your new niche is going to be, or if you're trying to figure out what your niche is going to be coming into the real estate market. A little bit of humor here to spice things up. I forget where I grabbed this one from. This might have been posted over on Rob Giuseppe from Pillar to Post Home Inspections Facebook page. Anytime I see something like this, I try to grab it and save it to throw in here because I think these are hilarious. That's obviously a gas-powered hot water tank that's no longer functional. With the road text on it, "I used to be hot." I got a kick out of that when I saw it, and I thought I would share that one with you guys. And one more for you here today. This one came out of one of the property management groups that I'm in on Facebook. For rent or rent to own, only $600 a month. This was posted by one of the West Coast property managers, if I remember correctly. So obviously there's a little bit of a difference between what $600 will get you on the West Coast and what $600 will get you here in Buffalo or in a lot of other markets in the country here. So let's jump right into our questions from housing providers around the country. We'll start with this one right here: renting without leases. Okay, so here's an interesting piece of advice I received from a real estate attorney here in Pennsylvania. We were discussing written leases, and he said, to my surprise, that he is adamantly against them, noting that written leases typically give tenants more rights than not. He says to just operate as a verbal month-to-month tenancy, which is the default in PA for a verbal lease, and if you have problems with the tenants, give them a 30-day notice that their lease is over. Then there's no arguing about whether they broke some clause in a lease, etc., just that the lease has been terminated and be out in 30 days. If there's a need to go to court for eviction, it's cut and dry. The lease has been terminated. There's no argument against that. I'm not sure what to think of this, not having a written lease in place. What are your thoughts? Wow, this is probably, the fact that this is a real estate attorney, I'll back up. I'll preface this by saying I'm not a real estate attorney or any attorney. I'm just a real estate broker. That being said, I've never heard an attorney give advice to the effect of don't have a written lease document, only operate from verbal leases. Like, there's so much room for things to go wrong in this scenario that I don't understand why any licensed attorney would issue this advice to someone. Maybe something is different in Pennsylvania that I don't know about. I don't know the laws of Pennsylvania. I'm a lot more familiar with New York, obviously. But this is not good advice. Leases, in my opinion, should always be a written document. Even if you're doing a simple month-to-month lease, make sure it's in writing. There should not be a verbal lease agreement because it just leaves too much to chance. So even if you wanted to do a month-to-month rental agreement, I would still make sure that it's in writing, because a well-written lease will remove the ambiguity from the lease as to what's due and expected from both sides of the contract. And not having that in place just leaves so much room for ambiguity, and who's responsible for utilities, who's responsible for snow, who's responsible for lawn, who's responsible for the appliances should they break. There's nothing, it's too broad. A well-written lease, this attorney apparently brings up the point of a lease can give the tenant more rights than it can give to the landlord. A well-written lease can favor whoever the lease writer is, whether it's the landlord or whether it's the tenant. So getting a lease that is well-written should resolve that problem right away. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with having a balanced lease either. It doesn't have to favor the housing provider so heavily that the tenants have no rights or anything else. Like, I believe in a landlord-weighted lease that is still fair to the tenant. And there's no reason for anything other than that. Like, I don't understand why there are some housing providers that go a little bit too far and get into overreach, and I don't like getting into that territory. That being said, you can have a very well-written lease that defines all of the core things that need to be defined without overreaching into the tenant's life and without giving the tenant, I guess, too much ability, too much authority to do whatever they want at the property. You need a well-written lease. There's no doubt in my mind that you need a well-written lease. If you want to debate whether it should be month to month, 6 months, 1 year, that option is largely going to be dependent on how you run your business and what the climate is in your state for landlord-tenant affairs. We at Own Buffalo do 1-year leases. And when we renew a lease, we renew it for another 1-year term. We do occasionally offer like a little bit shorter term lease or something like that if we're trying to keep something on our schedule for renewals, like so that we're not doing a renewal in the middle of winter, for instance. We try to avoid that whenever possible because we don't like winter vacancies. So that might be something that would change the term of our lease. But typically speaking, we do a 1-year lease. We don't screw around with the month-to-month. We don't screw around with a 6-month lease because we want our tenants on leases. Something else that you should probably think about is if you were ever in a position where you needed to sell this property, the buyer of the property is going to be looking for leases. And if the buyer of the property is using a bank, chances are the bank is going to be looking for information about the tenants and the tenancies as well. So if you don't have leases, you're going to be slowing down your transaction, either trying to get the tenants to sign leases after the fact or trying to get the tenant to sign an estoppel certificate, because chances are the buyer that's coming in is not going to want to take over a property and have no idea even so much as what the tenant's legal names are and what the rent are, or what the rent is, excuse me. I think I've gone on about this for long enough at this point. I think you guys kind of understand where I'm coming from. But definitely, definitely, definitely have a written lease document. Do not just fly by the seat of your pants with a verbal lease agreement. Change of ownership notice. Need quick help? Does anyone have a simple letter for existing tenants to notify them of a new landlord and rent payment instructions? I accidentally bought a duplex today and I'm closing tomorrow, so I need it fast. Obviously, this was posted back on November 19th, so we're a little bit late to the party on this one. The first thing I would do is attempt to make contact with the tenants after you close. Just knock on the doors. Explain that you're the new property owner and provide your contact info. Or ask the previous property owner if they have contact information for the tenants, whatever the case may be there. See what you can do to try to make contact with the tenants. I would think that if the previous owner has contact information for the tenant, they're more than likely going to provide that. Sometimes you'll be in a situation where the previous owner simply won't have any information because they're using a management company that was controlling all that or whatever, but there should be some way of finding something out about the property. I am going to switch over to desktop mode here and show you our change of management notice. This is the form that we use when we go out to tell new tenants that we've taken over the management of a building. You can modify this agreement to just by changing change of management to change of ownership notice. It should really be basically that simple. So it starts off, obviously, it's got our logo and our address with phone number and fax at the top. Please read this letter completely. Action from you is required. Dear tenant, recently the owner of the property has opted to change management companies to Own Buffalo Inc. You would just change that to say recently the ownership of the property has changed to whoever. As such, Own Buffalo Inc. will now be handling all aspects of your tenancy, such as rent collection, maintenance, leasing, and other details. This letter is to inform you that this change is effective immediately and explain the changes that you should expect, as well as the actions you need to take to ensure your continued tenancy. Please contact our office beginning immediately. Rent payments are made to our company. Your lease is still valid and enforced. And then it goes on to talk about how we accept payments online, mailing or dropping off a payment, or at a 7-Eleven or CVS location. We strive to make this transition from one manager to another as easy as possible on the tenant. However, there are a lot of changes that take place in a very short period of time. Any additional questions you have can be answered by contacting our office, 716-608-3200. This is short and sweet, and it's to the point. It tells the tenant, hey, we need you to contact us, and we post this right on their door. We'll also mail a copy or put a copy in the mailbox if necessary. So, for instance, we're in the process right now of onboarding a new 6-unit apartment building. I went and posted these notices on Monday when none of the tenants were home. They were at work. We haven't spoken with those tenants yet. I'll be going back out today, 2 days after the fact, to knock on doors and post notices a second time. And you can bet that when I post the second notice, there will be a great big note right here that says, second notice, please contact us today. Obviously, with it being the Thanksgiving holiday, people probably have a lot of things on their mind, but we still need to make contact with those tenants as soon as possible. So this is a real simple one-pager. If you need a copy of this, feel free to reach out to me either on Facebook or on YouTube. I can email you over a copy of it in doc format. No problem. Feel free to edit it, do whatever you need to do. Just make sure you take our contact information off of it, please. That's really all we ask. So that is our change of management notice. You could use the same thing for a change of ownership notice with a little bit of modification. And other than that, I would just attempt to make contact with the tenants and go from there. But this is a really nice little one-page form. It's a great way to get your contact info in front of the tenant, along with some steps that they need to take right away in order to make sure that they maintain their tenancy. Talk about ozone generators. I'm a big proponent of ozone generators. I think we've talked about them on the show here a couple times in the past, but this question popped up and I wanted to touch base on it. I have a tenant who wants to use an ozone machine in her room while there are other roommates in the house. Is that safe? I'm thinking no, since the furnace is on and will move the air around. Update, we're making sure everyone is out. So there were some replies to this, and the replies obviously are going to be the same response that I give, which is, yeah, no, you don't want to run an ozone generator in the same property. Essentially, ozone generators should not be run in a rental property or in any property where there are people, plants, people, plants, and pets. People, plants, and pets, excuse me, I had to refer to my notes here real quick. Ozone generators are a good way of taking odor out of a unit. And actually, I'll show you the one that we use. Let me switch back over to desktop mode here. There we go. These are not expensive units, and it's a good way to try to take heavy smell out of apartments. We've used these to eliminate smoke smell. We've used these to eliminate heavy pet odor. We've used these to take heavy cooking scent out of an apartment. It's not, a magic bullet by any means. You still need to clean and scrub and everything else before you run this. This is kind of the last step, if you will. But what this does is basically takes the gross stink out of the air, if you will, and kind of brings it back to, I wouldn't necessarily call it like a fresh linen scent or anything like that, but it does go a long way in helping you to improve the smell of a property that would otherwise be pretty stinky. So ozone generators do come with some risk. It's worth noting that while they are good at handling odor control, they don't do anything to kill mold. So if you're buying one of these in the hopes that it's going to kill mold, you are barking up the wrong tree. That's not what this is meant to do. It's meant mostly for things like odor control and things of that nature. They work very well in cars as well. As I'd mentioned, don't run it in a home with people, pets, or plants. Ozone generators and organic material really do not mix well. In terms of people, pets, and plants, it can be extremely dangerous to people and pets. Eye irritation, throat irritation, lung irritation, shortness of breath. You will not be able to breathe in this environment when an ozone generator is running. So keep that in mind. These are not something to screw around with. Ozone generators are not kind to organic life forms. And the way that we use ours, I'll jump back to the desktop mode here so you can see kind of how these operate. There's a little knob on the front here that is basically your timer in minutes. This is a little different. This is a newer model than the one that we have. Ours only runs for a maximum of 2 hours or 120 minutes. This one will run for, looks like 3 hours, 180 minutes. The rule that we were taught was if you run it for 2 hours, you have to let the room sit for another 2 hours or the home sit for another 2 hours after it runs for the ozone to clear out or dissipate or whatever the case may be. So for every hour that you're running it, you should let it sit for an hour. So if you run a 2-hour cycle, it should be 4 hours before you re-enter that space. And you should probably post some signs on the door if other people would be in and out of that space to let them know not to walk in either, or it could create a real headache for them as well. So definitely, when you're using an ozone generator, people, plants, and pets have to be out of the space for the entire duration that it's running, double the duration that it's running, just so that you're safe and making sure that you're not causing harm to people. So definitely, those ozone generators are a great way of taking smell out of a unit, but be careful when you're doing it. Just be safe when you're operating with those. And honestly, they even say right on the front of them, caution, use in unoccupied spaces only. So there's a note right on the top of it, or I'm sorry, right on the front of it to use in unoccupied spaces only. There's also, I think that caution notice on the top basically says the exact same thing. If you're looking to find one of these on Amazon, just search for ozone generator. They'll pop right up. There's a ton of them out there on the market. They all pretty much operate in the same fashion. It just basically boils down to price point, how big of square footage you need to clear up, things of that nature. Don't forget that you can run this multiple times, just move it from room to room or whatever the case may be. So that's where we're at on Ozone Generators. We love them. We use them pretty frequently when we're doing apartment turnovers. I highly recommend that's one of those inexpensive tools that you can throw in the back of your car and have when you go to do a turnover or something like that. So I would highly recommend it. That pretty much wraps things up for this week's episode of Ask a Property Manager. Thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. We love producing Ask a Property Manager, and you can definitely help us to improve by dropping a question in the comments, either on Facebook or on YouTube, and your question will be picked up and answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if I brought some value to your day, please do me a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach more people. We'll be back next week on December 2nd, which is next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern, with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching. If you live here in the States, enjoy your Thanksgiving break, and we'll see you next week.